You're listening to the Grind Line Podcast.
What's up, and welcome to another episode of the Grind Line Podcast. I'm your host, Greg. You're listening to episode 304. I am here in the morning with Ryan. It's an interesting day.
Action.
Yeah, it's an interesting day in Red Wings land. Steve Yzerman just held his press conference. We had a coach fired. Axel Sandin Pellikka's an absolute beast. Ryan, how you doing this morning? How was your holiday?
It's been good. It's been busy, but that's not a bad thing. I was out of town most of last week through the weekend, leading up to Christmas. Had a very nice little Christmas with the family at home. Went to the in-laws yesterday. Been relaxing, really, the past week plus, if you will. And then we got some drama the last 24 hours in the Red Wings world. Probably something that's been most arguably overdue, but we'll get into that. How's yours been?
I'm not used to drinking coffee while recording a podcast. I'm like,
Same.
I had to go get coffee. My holiday was
the
good.
morning brunch with the Grand Line.
So on Friday, and this will just be a quick personal thing before we jump into it. My daughter, while getting off the kitchen table,
Oh boy.
swung between two chairs instead of turning and standing and busted the bottom of her chin open and needed to go to the emergency room and get 5 stitches. So that was fun. She had stitches for Christmas. But she's in high spirits now, and she just got tape holding together her cut now until it heals all the way. But she's doing good. But
good.
There's no holiday I think I have had since the children have been born without some kind of child drama happening around a holiday. So it's always fun. But yeah, the drama in Detroit right now is Steve Yzerman let Derek Lalonde have a nice Christmas before giving him the boot. So
did he
Derek,
though? I mean, it sounds like it may have been preemptive before the holiday, which is kind of rough, but also the nature of the beast.
So it sounded like Yzerman had said that they had been thinking about it for the past 10 days to 2 weeks or so after the going into Montreal. They're like, the Montreal games, they basically said sealed it for him that a change needed to be made. But Derek Lalonde was let go, and Bob Boughner was also let go. They bring in Todd McLellan. Todd McLellan comes to the Detroit Red Wings with a record of .598, .412, and .134 over 16 seasons with San Jose, Edmonton, and LA. It is a huge change. McLellan, I think, was at the top of a lot of our lists as a coaching replacement. He has playoff experience. He has a winning record, as I just read. And it's a guy that I think has that, I don't want to call it tenacity so much, but I think he's flexible. I think he has the ability to make change. Steve says that he was in contact with him ever since he left the Red Wings for Tampa. They've been talking ever since, and it's a guy he really wants to work with. Bob Boughner was let go because Todd McLellan decided that he wanted to bring in Trent Yawney as a defensive coach as well.
Right-hand man, if you will.
Yeah, so Bob Boughner out, Derek Lalonde out, and you got McLellan and Yawney coming in. And I think it's a huge, much needed change. And hopefully it does what I think it's intended to do, which is shock this team into realizing that they need to be better or that there's going to be consequences.
Yeah. Did you not take away a little bit of frustration in that entire presser?
Oh, Yzerman was pissed. I even comment. I was in the YouTube chat. I'm like, Yzerman is fuming right now. And
God bless
I love
you
that
for
he snapped backs at the stupid questions too that the reporters ask. He's like, you know a better way? I'm all open. Just let me know. But he was mad. You could tell he was very frustrated.
Yeah, and rightfully so. I don't want to jump around too much through the presser. I know we're kind of go through the whole thing, but he made the comment that the team is not performing to what his expectations were. And along with that, went the coaching staff, and he made a comment, roughly stated, that the way that they're performing isn't good enough. And he expected, came out and said it this time, that this is a playoff team. He said specifically the wild card, but really you go back the last couple of years, he's danced around stating that this team should be playoff worthy. He finally stated after how things have gone to this point that he believed in going into this season they had a wild card caliber team. With how the East is set up, I think that's a fair assessment or fair way to approach where you're at in terms of the roster. So to be pissed off, I think, is fair. You mentioned how it's probably been a couple weeks that he's been thinking about this potential change. And with McLellan being available, it made the most sense. And as you said, it sounds like there was also conversations that had to take place with the Kings because they bought him out. So there was some money and finagling that had to be worked there. It also is apparent that it's a multi-year deal of some sort. For whatever reason, we never get those details, which is the stupidest thing ever, but it is what it is. So this wasn't done. I like that he called out the fact, again, I'm getting toward the end of the presser, but he didn't want to put on an interim tag because now that you're leaving too much uncertainty, basically the takeaway from that is you're leaving too much uncertainty with the roster. They don't know if this is who's going to be leading the boat going forward. So I bring him in. He's hired. He's there under contract. This is what the expectations are going to be moving forward. And here we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, and I think that's where we'll kind of start. So we already kind of skimmed through the first few bullet points. I take extensive notes. If you follow us over on Twitter, I literally go point by point and post the entire basically press briefing on Twitter as a kind of summary. But we covered a few of the first points. Yzerman said it's not performing to his expectations, and they started thinking about a change. Ultimately, they need good players to have a good team. So what were the right moves? And then I think where it started to get interesting is that he said that, like you said, from the beginning of the year, the expectations were competing for a wild card spot. And that is the first time I have ever heard Steve Yzerman actually give a precise measure on what he was looking for from the beginning of the season. Normally it's, we want to be competitive. We want to be able to stay in the games. We want to be in the fight. No, he said from the beginning of this season, the expectations were competing for a wild card spot, and that they have missed so far, so that a change needed to be made, and that the decision came down to timing. So he said after St. Louis, they decided to pull the trigger. They ended up pulling the trigger the day after Christmas. And I think that's huge to be able to actually put in an actual like role on this team and say, this is where they should be based on what is on the team. I think that's the furthest Yzerman has ever gone.
Yeah, he kind of built off that point in outside just the coaching staff not performing, hence the change. He called out the team. Flat out said, we need to score more, be better defensively, keep the puck out of our net. We need to get better. You need good players. I think this was Ansar Khan, I think, asked the question, what's missing on this team right now? And that's what some of the things that he mentioned. But from that point on, he highlights that they need to still have patience, meaning the players they've drafted and that it, quote, takes time. He kind of kept going to the well on that one several times over, that there's a lot of good guys out there, and we'll get to it later on about who he calls out in particular. But he stated, again, flat out, they don't have a roster to win a Stanley Cup, at least in his eyes, with where things are at. The coaching change was made because he felt the team is far better than their results, and that they feel that they can play for that wild card. So yep. It's tough because you know that he's admitting that they're not a Stanley Cup contender, but he feels if they can at least get into the playoffs, then who knows what could happen. When really that's all you hope for.
And we've been saying that basically this whole time. We're like, and people had said, well, why are you firing the coach? Well, because we had said that the roster is better than the results on the ice have been. And at that point, I feel it comes down to coaching. That's what it comes down to. You've got players. If you look at it and people are like, we made so many changes in the offseason that made this team worse. And you really didn't. I mean, you got rid of Jake Wallman, and people are still going to be bitter about that with how he's performing in San Jose, but he wouldn't be doing the same role here. It would be completely different. Shane Gostisbehere, I understand not re-signing him because of the contract that he got. But again, you expected guys like, you got rid of Sprong, you expected Berggren to come play full time and replace that role. You expected to get a full year out of a high level Patrick Kane. It hasn't happened yet. Simon Edvinsson, if you're mad about Jake Wallman, but then you can't at the same time be happy about Simon Edvinsson coming in and doing what he's doing, it's not where it needs to be for the roster that's on the ice. And he's even went as far as to say, like, the players are a good group of pros. And it isn't like they don't want to do well, but ultimately the coach is going to try and get the most from the players. You can't control a coach's decision on who plays and how much. Players work to get into their roles. It's up to the coaching staff to maximize players, but also inspire them and give them hope. And then the players need to buy in. And to me, that sounds like that is where Yzerman's kind of breaking point was that I gave you these players. It's your job to make them to say, go out there and play at the best of your game, to change around lines to make sense, to change your play style if it's not working. And I think we talked about this at one point last week, is that seemed to be Newsy's thing, is that he might shuffle the lines a little bit, but at no point did he try and say, okay, let's dump the system for a few games. And it looked like maybe he did against Toronto. It's just dump it and go play aggressive, high offense hockey, or let players play their roles. And they fall back on the same old system. And I think that is kind of probably the straw that broke the camel's back, is the whole, you as a coach, here are your players, go get the best of them. And this is my expectations, and you're not meeting expectations.
And along that, I think it was Ted Colfin that asked, did the message get stale from the players or from the coaches to the players?
Can I pause for a minute? Can we, if anyone from the Red Wings organization is listening, can we please get some microphones on the press people? Because I can hear responses, but I have no idea what's being asked.
They were adjusting. I noticed after it started, they were trying to get the audio to pull in the outside. It's like they turned off the buffer, if you will. They need to get some Cisco in there to get the speakers overhead to, and then have those individually controlled.
Like
anything. Yeah. But no, I think it was Colfin that asked if the roster, if the message was getting stale. And Yzerman kind of fought back on that one. He's like, quote, I don't believe in the theory that coaches have a shelf life. Good coaches adapt to the team they have. And I thought that was interesting because, to your point, what adjustments were actually taking place? Because you mentioned how in one game they look like this high flying team that can compete with anyone, and then they go right back into a shell and don't even get a goal on the board or one goal on the board, and they're getting beat 2, 3, 4-1. And he doesn't. Yzerman said he didn't necessarily agree with the fact that that could happen, but he went right back to that they're not meeting expectations. And to further that, he feels that hopefully with the new coach, time will tell if Todd, quote, with his approach will be able to get us going in the right direction, end quote. So he's hoping that that new voice, while not saying he doesn't believe that coaches and messages get stale, he's still kind of saying that he does agree with it, even though he doesn't necessarily agree with it, that a new voice should hopefully light a spark under this team to get their shit together, for lack of better words.
And then I think that he talks a little bit about them coming into the team to get them to this McLellan and Yanni, to get them to that next level for this season and beyond. And then later on, made another comment about that, which makes me think it's probably a 3+ year deal is what it sounds like it is. Which is I think what coaches get is they probably get 3-year deals. You're not signing a coach, especially one like Todd McLellan, just to come in for a year. And hopefully, like you said, light a spark under this team, get them going, bring in a different system, figure out how to play players to the best of their abilities. Because he also mentioned like Joe Veleno and Michael Rasmussen last season had bigger roles. And this season, their roles have been reduced. And I don't see a reason why they would do that. Like, why would you give them more responsibility last season than to only reduce that this season? Because you saw how well Michael Rasmussen did last season before he got injured. Integral part of the team, was producing. He was making defensive plays, and then this season it's like they neutered him, which is kind of weird. So if he could come in, if McLellan can come in and say, hey, go hit people, go stand in front of the net, use your size, use your body. You can. He's so good. Like Michael Rasmussen is so good in front of the goalie, getting those. He's got quick hands. He's good at getting those kind of greasy goals in front that Bertuzzi used to get in. Yeah. But he's bigger. So I think if you can come in and utilize players how they're supposed to be, which I think is what Newsy kind of stopped doing. That's how you get back into this, because Yzerman still believes that they're not far enough out to where that this season is a wash. He thinks they can still get in. You just got to go on a run.
Well, yeah, to that point, he called out that if you win a couple games in a row, you're right back in the conversation with the wild card spot. So the opportunity is still very much there for them to make an impact. Yeah, you see teams like Ottawa, they've been on fire. I think they're 8-2 over their last 10 games. But then you also look at a team like Boston, for instance, who made a coaching change, firing Rutherford, which still is crazy to me. But they have, I think they're 11-4 since they made that adjustment, bringing in Sacco from the bench and putting him in the head coach role. So you're hoping to see that similar spark because, and I mentioned Ottawa because they're a team that also brought in a new coach for the season. They didn't make an in-season change, but they did make adjustments as well. I think there's 4 or 5 Atlantic teams from the article I recently read. I don't think I have it pulled up still. I think it was a Hockey News article. But you're hoping for what you're seeing in a couple of these teams that you're going to have that same bump, if you will. It's not working out for Buffalo, but that's just a team that you never know why they're so bad. They just continue to just have mediocrity across the board. what I liked to kind of go off that though is that for where we're at, Yzerman made a comment about what it was. Was it the fact that he looked at McLellan because of his prior coaching experience? And I like how you made the point about Rasmussen in particular, because you would hope that you look back on McClellan's time in San Jose and maybe he can be like, hey, you're like a Joe Thornton type player, big body, aggressive, use it, go to the net, wreak some havoc. We saw Thornton do that to Detroit for freaking years, and we couldn't stop him. Now you hope that with the guys that he's played or coached in his time in his tenure, he can take those experiences and bring it to Detroit. Not saying that Newsy didn't have that with his time in Tampa. They had awesome roster builds and great players, but maybe that outside perspective coming in now is what this roster is going to need.
Yep. And with that, I think we're going to take a quick break. Message from our sponsors. Will come back and just finish up the presser with our thoughts about kind of what this team needs to do starting basically today. McClellan's on the ice today. They have a game. So we'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. The 2024-25 NHL season still has that new car smell, and the action is heating up at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NHL. It's super easy for first-timers to get started at DraftKings Sportsbook. Try betting on something simple like picking a team to win. And if you are new to DraftKings, listen up. New customers bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. Download DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code THPN. That's code THPN for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas, 21 and over. Age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.co/ice.
From the chill of the arena to skates on ice and people hitting the boards, an NHL game is a sports experience like none other. And when you are looking for tickets, your pick should be Game Time. Game Time is the only app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. And see the great seats with Game Time picks and see the view from your seat on your phone before you buy your tickets. All-in pricing shows you your total cost up front, and you can buy tickets in seconds with just a couple taps. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less somewhere else, Game Time will credit you 110% off the difference. With event cancellation policies that automatically refund your tickets and 24-hour returns guaranteed, you are protected with the Game Time app. And starting now until December 2nd, Game Time is giving us an exclusive deal on Winter Classic tickets. You can get 10% on bleacher seats and 20 to 25% on home plate area tickets. So don't miss out on one of the biggest sporting events this year at Wrigley Field. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code THPN for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code THPN for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. And we're back, and I want to talk a little bit about what I am trademarking Yzer sass. Or Yzer-tude. We got some Yzer-tude where we kind of talked about it, where he kind of shot back at reporters. And I think most people should do that. When reporters ask a dumb question, you should respect a dumb answer. That's what you're going to get.
Fair. I don't know if they really weren't bad questions. I felt though.
Some of them were prodding. Like like you ask a question like, well, why aren't you doing this better? Like, well, what do you want? Like,
you know what? For how the season's going, I don't blame them.
Sure. So he was asked about a shakeup. And he's, quote, said, what are you hoping for in a shakeup? Just to do something and get attention, looking to make moves that improve the team, not looking to create a story. That's the thing. So people want these big splashy moves so that it's like feel good stuff. It makes you feel good that they tried to do something. And he went on to talk about, like, from the beginning of the season, they talk to every team and they say, we want this guy, but you can't trade two bad guys for one good guy. Like, it doesn't work like that. And there are 32 other teams. And it's a slow process. Everyone is trying to improve, and difference makers do not become available like candy. Like, it's not something you just go out and be like, I want this guy, and I'll give you Ben Sherratt and Andrew Kopp for Leon Draisaitl. Like, those moves don't happen. So he said, like, he understands the frustration, and he understands that the product on the ice is not what the fans deserve. He came out and said that. He's like, we understand that you're frustrated, but I can't. He's like, we're going to do everything in our power to speed this up. We're going to try and get this going as fast as possible and make moves that make sense for the team. But he's not just going to try and create storylines by making moves or panicking, because that's when you make bad moves.
Yeah, and I like that he made that call out too, because if you're just doing something, trade or making a move, like that's going to come back to bite you in the ass. I had that specifically called out in my notes. He's like, the quote specifically was, "We're trying, but when you force it, you panic, you make bad moves," end quote. He's like, it's not like it's easy to be patient. You're constantly looking at ways to improve your teams. And you made the comment about the 32 other teams all looking for difference makers. It's difficult. We all understand that. And we've talked about previously how you look at the NFL, you look at some of these other leagues, you can make moves and immediately impact your roster. Because if you think about it, and I've tried to make this abundantly clear, these NFL players coming into the league out of college are between 21 and 23, 24 years old.
They're fully developed, basically.
That's where you're finally starting to see a lot of the prospects come in and make an impact. And I've mentioned this a couple of weeks back when I think on my first episode back. Look at Yzer. He was over 20 years old when he finally started making an impact. Raymond, now over 20 years old, truly making an impact on this roster. You saw Larkin coming into his prime. Yes, he got in at 18, but the impact he's made in is well into his 20s as they're developing and growing as a person, maturing, getting bigger, understanding what it takes to be a pro player in the NHL, not just the AHL, which is a completely different monster in its own right. And that's why we haven't seen a guy like Axel Sandin Palika, who's in Ottawa right now, lighting up the World Juniors. And for that matter, in Europe in the Swedish Elite League. So it takes time. And he again did highlight the word patience in all of this, which is probably not going to set well with a lot of people. We saw one of the first comments in the chat. It's been 5 + 6 years since Yzerman took over, and they're not doing anything with it. So you've had people really the last 2 years that have been calling for Yzerman to be fired, which to me still doesn't make sense, because you look at where he has been for drafting. I already mentioned Sandy Palika, however you want to say it. Nate Danielson, Raymond, Seider, Edmondson, all guys that he has drafted. Kosa. They're almost there. But again, do you want to put them in as an underripe 18, 19, maybe 20-year-old? Or do you want to see them ready to go and take that next step and play through a full 82-game season at 21, 22, 23 and make it through that season? We're already seeing some stumbling point. We've seen Edmondson hurt a little bit. We've seen Seider be the Iron Man at this point. Raymond's been able to play through a lot. Larkin's been back and forth, but we see what the impact is when he's not fully healthy. You need these guys healthy. You need them to be able to handle the brunt of a full season in the NHL size, for that matter.
Yeah, and he talked to that point too. He was asked, like, what are you trying to build around? And he's like, well, what is Dylan Larkin, 28? Like, that's what we're trying to do, that and younger. And you see guys, like you said, like Edmondson coming in, like Casper coming in, and ASP lighting it up. He said, is he 1, 2, 3 years away? We don't know. Like, he could be playing in the fall. And he talks about bringing guys in from Grand Rapids in the fall and building around that. But like you said, it takes time for those prospects to develop. And you may be able to make the point that maybe Edmondson could have been brought in a month earlier, and maybe you win one more game because of his defensive efforts and you're in the playoffs. It's last season. There's no point in focusing on that right now. What you want to focus on is the guys that are coming in. He mentioned Dmitry Buchelikov, and he's over in KHL, and that's a different issue, he says. But that's, again, is he a couple years off? Is he 1 year off? Could you break the contract and bring him over next season? Who knows? Says Carter Mazur should be back in a month. Does that delay his development? Maybe, but they expect him to play. So he knows what's in the system. He watches these guys play. Yeah,
Mazur for Grand Rapids. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but they expect him to play NHL hockey. Like, that is a thing they expect Carter Mazur to do. But it's about being patient and bringing these guys in and then making moves. But you don't want to go out and acquire random guys just to acquire random guys. And I think that's the big thing. He also talks about Berggren stepping up and playing a bigger role like he should be this season. And it's up to someone like Todd McLellan to do that. He's on the ice, like I said, on the ice right now with the guys. He's got to get to know players. He needs to get in, get with the guys and tell them what the system is going to be. And I think what you can expect from a guy like Todd McLellan is he does play a defensive style of hockey, but he does play better possession. He does play better forced entry. You're going to see, I think, more offense out of his system rather than just a strictly take chances when you think you got him. I think there's going to be more. I expect the Red Wings to not get outshot every night now with a system like this. But if you can keep that defensive style of play while still letting your offensive players do what they need to do, I think he can find success. And it's up to guys that are on the roster right now to do that. It's up to Patrick Kane to come out and say, and he said it himself, to come out and be better. It's up to Vladimir Tarasenko to come out and be better. But a guy like Vladimir Tarasenko, you just got to tell him to go out there and score goals. Like, it's that they were being hemmed in by a system that was just defense, where I think McLellan's going to break that out a little bit.
Yeah, and I like that he called out in particular Berggren. You mentioned Joe Veleno, Michael Rasmussen earlier, but he called those three out to basically, the expectation essentially was for them to take over the roles that you saw with Robbie Fabry and Dylan Sprong, or
Daniel Sprong.
Daniel Sprong, wow. With them leaving and having those younger players take on a bigger role. And you mentioned how they were kind of pulled back from that a little bit, it felt like this year. Was that coaching? Was that on? But he kind of called out the players to elevate themselves now, because he knows that they can do it. They've shown the flashes. That's why they have the contracts. But now it's actually putting that into practice. And you need, hopefully, the coaching staff to pull that out of them now.
I think they can do it. I mean, I'm hopeful. I like to be a hopeful optimist. Give me 10 games and see where we're at after that. But I think that I'm optimistic that a change, and we've seen it happen before, where a change, like you said with Boston, can really show players that you need to do better.
And McLellan is live with the media right now.
Beautiful. Okay, so I think that's where we're going to end the episode. Ryan, I want to get your final thoughts before we sign off.
Just go win hockey. That's really all I can put it at this point. So, already Ryan 33.
Yeah, I agree. Just let this change be a kind of new starting point for this day one. Like they say, this is day one. Start the season today and do it. Just go out there and play really good hockey. You can follow me online at Breaking the Wing. You can follow the Grindline Podcast online at Grindline Pod. We'll give a shout out to the Hockey Podcast Network for hosting us and spreading us around. Vintage Detroit, which is the only place you should get your Detroit jerseys from and worked on. They are absolutely amazing, and they've been killing it through this holiday season. So I take all my business over to Vintage Detroit. You can follow us on YouTube, search the Grindline Podcast, sub to us, and turn on those notifications. You'll get notified every time an episode goes live. And we do have a Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Grindline Podcast. We've got really, really low, entry-level Patreon stuff that just help us keep our subscriptions, keep the lights on, keep our videos coming out, and keeping the content flowing. But that is going to do it for us today. I can't even say tonight because it's still the morning. That's going to do it for us today. So for Ryan, I am Greg. You stay classy, Hockeytown.